She only took the cafe shift to help her sick sister. But the man at table 2 wasn't just another customer. He was a billionaire with a past and a question that would change everything. Can I stay for both of you? Julia Moore hadn't planned on working that day. In fact, she had promised herself she wouldn't step foot back into that tiny cafe after what she'd endured the last time she tried waitressing. Years ago, before her sister's life fell apart, and hers was upended in the aftermath. But life didn't often ask what Julia wanted anymore. It simply demanded. Her phone had buzzed that morning, a weak and croaky voice on the other end. It was Emily, her younger sister, apologizing between coughs. The fever had come back. The meds weren't helping. Could Julia please cover her shift at the cafe just this once? The owner was strict. The job was already hanging by a thread, and if she missed today, she might not be able to come back at all. Julia had paused only a moment before saying yes. She always said yes. She bundled up Layla, her 6-year-old niece, in a second-hand yellow coat that was 2 sizes too big and slipped a bright matching dress over her small frame. Layla didn't complain. She never did. She was used to moving, waiting, whispering, adjusting. Her mother's illness had made her older than her years, and Julia could never quite decide whether that broke her heart more or made her proud. The cafe was small and dim, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The air inside smelled like overbrewed coffee, and the only light came from a flickering neon sign near the counter. Julia tied on the dark blue apron that still smelled faintly of Emily's perfume and tucked her long brunette hair into a messy bun. Her face was tired but still striking. Sharp cheekbones, wide brown eyes, a kind of tired beauty that drew glances but discouraged conversation. She set Layla up in the farthest booth near the back, handing her crayons and a stack of napkins. The little girl smiled softly, already coloring with small, determined strokes. Julia took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped out onto the floor. It was just a few tables, mostly regulars. Construction workers, retirees, a college student hunched over a laptop. It felt manageable, familiar. For a moment, it was almost okay. And then he walked in. Julia noticed him the way you notice a flicker of sunlight in a room that's always dark. He didn't belong. Not in that cafe, not in that neighborhood. He wore a light gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a tailored jacket folded neatly over his arm. His posture was straight, deliberate, but not arrogant. His dark brown hair was swept back, and his deep-set eyes, brown, alert, unreadable, scanned the room briefly before settling on a table in the corner. Table 2. She didn't know why her stomach tightened. He ordered only a coffee. Black. His voice was calm and low, the kind that made people lean in slightly without realizing. Julia nodded, wrote it down even though she didn't need to, and walked away. When she returned with the mug, she caught him glancing in Layla's direction. The girl was humming softly to herself, her legs swinging beneath the table, completely content in her little world of paper and color. "She's your daughter?" the man asked. Julia stiffened for a second, then shook her head. "My niece. She seems happy." Julia gave a short, polite smile. "She tries." The man didn't push. He just sipped his coffee, watching her with the kind of expression that made her feel like he was seeing more than she wanted him to. She quickly excused herself to help another table, her mind racing. What was his deal? A bored businessman? A quiet snob? A recruiter? God forbid, a social worker. He stayed for nearly an hour, said little, tipped well, and left without fanfare. When she checked the bill later, she found a crisp $100 bill beneath his empty cup. No note. No name. That night, as she tucked Layla into the pull-out couch they shared in their cramped apartment, Julia couldn't stop thinking about him. The man at table 2. There was something strange about him. Not threatening, not inappropriate, just present. And for some reason, that presence stayed with her longer than she liked. She told herself it was nothing. But the next day he returned. The soft chime above the cafe door rang at exactly 9:04 a.m. Julia didn't have to look up. She already knew. He was back. Same table, same deliberate stride, same simple order, black coffee, no sugar, no cream. The only difference today was that Julia wasn't ready. She'd spent the previous night convincing herself it had been a one-time thing. A rich stranger who wandered into the wrong part of town, maybe got lost, maybe felt adventurous. But here he was again, like clockwork, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And once again, he watched her. Not the way men usually watched. His gaze wasn't about what he saw. It was about what he was trying to understand. Julia didn't like it. Not because it was threatening, it wasn't, but because it made her feel exposed. Still, she approached his table with practiced calm. "You're back," she said, offering a small, neutral smile. "I am," he replied. "Place has character." She raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's a compliment." "It is." She glanced down at her notepad even though she didn't need to. "Just the coffee again?" He nodded. "Unless you recommend something." She blinked. "From here?" A corner of his mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "Surprise me." Julia sighed, scribbled something down, and walked back toward the kitchen, annoyed with herself for smiling. Again, she didn't have time for this. For him. For anyone. She poured the coffee, then threw together the only thing she considered edible on the menu. A toasted bagel with cream cheese and a sliced banana on the side. Simple, but Layla liked it. And that meant something. When she brought the plate over, he didn't comment. Just thanked her quietly and began to eat. She almost turned to leave when he spoke again. "Is she here today?" Julia froze for a second before realizing he meant Layla. "She's in the back," she said carefully. "She's drawing." "She's good," he added. "The flamingo yesterday, impressive." Julia blinked. "You notice that?" "I notice a lot," he said. "Part of my job." "What do you do?" she asked before she could stop herself. He stirred his coffee. "Restaurants?" "You own one?" "Something like that. Vague, clean, avoidant." She recognized it because she used the same trick when people asked her things. Julia cleared her throat and stepped back. "Let me know if you need anything." She didn't wait for an answer. Back behind the counter, she watched him carefully. He didn't pull out a laptop or phone. He didn't take calls or type emails. He just sat there, calm, like a man with nowhere to be. Every so often, his eyes would drift toward the back, where Layla was lost in her drawings. Julia's thoughts began to spiral. How did he know they were struggling? Did he think she was looking for a savior? Was he some kind of investor trying to buy his way into people's lives? Or worse, was this some twisted power game? Because in her world, kindness always came with a price tag. Always. But despite everything, there was something about the man at table 2 that unsettled her for another reason entirely. He didn't ask for anything. Not her name, not her story, not even her number. He just came back. And somehow that scared her more than if he had. When his meal was done, he stood up, left the money on the table, this time in exact change, no tip, and walked out without another word. Julia walked over to clean up. Under the plate, folded neatly in half, was a napkin. One sentence, scribbled in clean, simple handwriting. "Tell her the flamingo looked happy." Julia stared at it for a long time, and for the first time in a long while she felt a strange heat behind her eyes. Not frustration, not exhaustion, something softer. She folded the napkin, slid it into her apron pocket, and glanced back toward the corner booth where Layla sat, completely unaware that anything in their life might be changing. Because maybe, just maybe, it already had. It became a routine. He came in every morning around the same time, always after the early crowd, but before the lunch rush, when the cafe felt like it belonged to no one. He never brought anyone. He never wore anything flashy. No watch, no visible phone, no arrogance. Just the same light shirts, neat trousers, clean hands, and those quiet, observant brown eyes. Table 2 was always open. It was almost as if the staff had stopped seating anyone else there on instinct. Even the owner, gruff and overworked, had taken to nodding politely at the man, though Julia doubted he had any idea who he really was. Because Julia was beginning to suspect something. It was a gut feeling at first. A kind of inner tension, like the edges of a puzzle that didn't quite line up. The way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he studied the room like it mattered. He was too composed, too careful. The way his shoes were polished but never muddy. The way his fingers were still despite being idle. No tapping, no fidgeting. He was used to control, to silence, to power. One morning she decided to test it. She brought his coffee without asking, just like always. But instead of bagels or fruit, she brought him something the cafe rarely sold. One of the hot breakfast sandwiches that usually sat wrapped under the warmer. Not terrible, but definitely not gourmet. She placed it in front of him wordlessly. He looked at it, then at her, then took a bite, swallowed. Hmm, he said. Not a fan? She asked. It's honest, he replied. Julia tilted her head. Is that good or bad? He wiped his mouth with a napkin. It's rare. That stopped her. She wanted to ask more, wanted to press. But something about his tone, not dismissive, just measured, made her hesitate. Instead, she turned to go, but he called out softly before she could walk away. Julia, he said. She froze. I asked around, he added gently, sensing her tension. Emily's your sister, right? She turned slowly. Why? I heard she's been sick. I wanted to know if she was okay. Julia's shoulders tensed. We're managing. He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. I didn't mean to intrude. I've noticed how much you take on. You work full shifts, bring Layla with you, cover for your sister, handle customers without breaking stride. That's not nothing. Her jaw clenched. I don't need a lecture. It wasn't one. He met her eyes then, fully, calmly, without flinching. And that was what undid her. Most people, when they looked at her, either pitied her or avoided looking too long, like her exhaustion might be contagious. But he looked through all of it, like he saw her clearly and wasn't afraid of what he saw. She crossed her arms. Why are you here? A small pause. He didn't look away. Because this place reminds me of a life I forgot I used to want. She frowned. You're not from here. No, he said, but I think I should have been. She didn't know what to say to that, because it wasn't the kind of answer you expect from a stranger over coffee. It was the kind of truth that usually came after years, or never at all. She walked away again, retreating behind the counter. Her hands were shaking. That afternoon, she found another note on a napkin. This time, it was folded in the shape of a small paper crane. Layla spotted it first, giggling as she unfolded it with tiny fingers. There were only 3 words written inside. Keep drawing, sunshine. Layla beamed, and Julia felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what this man was doing. She didn't know what he wanted, but she was starting to understand something terrifying. She wanted him to come back. The 4th week he came in, it rained. Not just a drizzle, a cold, slanted rain that turned sidewalks into slick mirrors and made the cafe's windows fog with warmth from the inside. Julia arrived early that morning, soaked through her jacket, her boots squeaking softly against the tile. She shook off the water and started her usual prep, wiping down menus, fixing the register, brewing the first pot of coffee. Layla was home with a neighbor that day. Emily had a rare good morning and insisted Julia go alone. You never take a breath, she'd whispered between coughs. Maybe if she's not with you today, you'll actually drink a cup of coffee instead of surviving on air. Julia smiled at the memory now, though faintly. The cafe was unusually empty for a Friday. Most people didn't want to trek through sheets of rain just for eggs and burnt toast. She liked the quiet. It felt like a pause, a space between moments. The bell rang at 9:07. He was late, but it was him. This time he was wet too. The collar of his pale shirt damp, a few drops trailing down his temple. No umbrella, just a coat flung over one arm and that same steady composure that made people shift without knowing why. He sat down at table 2 without looking around. He didn't even glance at the menu. Just sat there, eyes unfocused, as if he were far away from himself. Julia approached slowly, drying her hands with a towel. Rough morning? She asked, trying not to sound concerned. He blinked, looked up, and offered a faint smile. It was softer than usual, weary even. I suppose it's finally caught up to me, he said. What has? Pretending. Julia tilted her head. That's vague even for you. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. For the first time, she noticed how tired he looked. The shadows beneath his eyes weren't from lack of sleep. They were the kind that came from caring too much for too long. I owe you an explanation, he said. She crossed her arms. For what? For being here. For the way I watch you, for the notes I leave. She said nothing. The silence gave him permission to continue. My name isn't Alex Jordan, he said, her brow furrowed. What? That's the name I gave your boss when I applied for a loyalty card here. His voice held no guilt, only gravity. It's a common alias I use when I want to be somewhere without being recognized. Julia stared at him. Recognized by who? He hesitated, then said it simply. I own R&R Group. The name hit her like a cold splash. She blinked, stunned. The restaurant corporation? He nodded. Julia took a slow step back. Why would a billionaire? Because I'm drowning, he interrupted gently. And I wanted to remember what it felt like to be around real people. Her mouth opened, then closed. He pressed forward as if afraid this would be the only moment he'd get. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and our son. A car crash. She was on the way to one of my award ceremonies. I should have been in that car. I wasn't. I was busy networking. The rain outside tapped harder against the windows, as if the world leaned in to listen. I didn't just lose them. I lost myself. I spent 2 years flying to meetings, nodding through handshakes, pretending I was still interested in everything I built. But it felt like I was standing in the ruins of a kingdom that meant nothing. Julia's throat felt tight. She hadn't expected this, any of it. I started going to places I'd never been, he continued, places I wouldn't be followed. I sat in diners and bus stops and watched people live, and then I found this cafe. She tried to keep her voice steady. Why me? His answer came without hesitation. Because you don't flinch. You carry so much and yet you never drop it. You're not pretending. You're surviving, but you do it with fire in your eyes. And Layla, his voice caught for the first time, Layla reminds me of what I lost, but she also reminds me of what's still possible. Julia felt the tears burn before she could stop them. She looked down, ashamed to be vulnerable in front of someone like him, someone who seemed carved out of strength. But when she looked up, he wasn't watching her pain like a spectacle. He was meeting it. I don't want to fix your life, he said softly. I just want to be part of it. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I don't trust men like you, she whispered. They always want something. I don't want anything, he replied, except time. With you. With her. She didn't say yes. Didn't say no. She simply stood there, heart racing, trying to figure out if this was the beginning of something, or the cruelest kind of mirage. Before he left, he placed a folded envelope on the edge of the table. For Emily, he said, it's not charity, it's peace of mind. Then he walked out, letting the rain swallow him whole. Julia didn't open the envelope until hours later. Inside was a check for the exact amount Emily needed for treatment, and a note, you've given more than you know. Let someone give back. She read it twice, then 3 times. And for the first time in years, she let herself hope. Julia didn't sleep that night. She lay on the pull-out mattress beside Layla, who had crawled over sometime after midnight and now slept curled against her chest, one tiny hand tucked beneath her chin. The room was dark and silent, but Julia's mind was loud, too loud to rest. Everything he had said, everything he had done. It looped in her thoughts like a broken film reel. The truth about his name, the story of his wife and child, the envelope she hadn't expected, the way he'd looked at her, not like a man trying to possess something, but like one who saw something, worth holding gently. It terrified her, because people didn't stay. They didn't help without expectations. And kindness this deep, this patient, was never free. There was always a bill, always a catch. By morning, she had made a decision. She packed a small bag for Layla and left the envelope on the kitchen table, untouched. She scribbled a note to Emily. I'm okay, just need space, and locked the door behind her. They didn't go far, just far enough. Julia took a temporary job cleaning night offices 2 towns over. The hours were long, the pay barely enough, but the work kept her busy, and the building had a daycare on site. Layla didn't ask why they left, but Julia could see the confusion behind her eyes. The little girl didn't say much those first few days. She missed the cafe, missed her drawings, missed her corner booth. Julia pretended she didn't notice. She told herself she was being smart. That distance would protect them. That Alexander Ryan was a world away, and that was where he belonged. And yet, every night when she scrubbed desks and vacuumed carpets, her mind wandered. She thought of his napkin notes, the quiet way he listened, the softness in his voice when he'd said Layla reminded him of what was still possible. She thought of him standing in the rain, telling her he didn't want to fix her life, just to be part of it. And she hated how badly she wanted to believe him. On the fifth night, Julia found herself crying in the supply closet. She wasn't sure when the tears started or why they wouldn't stop. Maybe it was the weight of holding everything up for so long. Maybe it was the fact that no one had asked her how she was doing in years. And when someone finally did, she ran. The next morning, as she walked Layla into the daycare center, a woman at the front desk handed her a plain white envelope. "There was a man here asking for you yesterday," the woman said gently. "He said his name was Alex. He left this and said it was urgent." Julia's heart slammed into her ribs. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words. "Please, let me find you." And beneath that, a child's drawing, folded carefully. Layla's flamingo, from weeks ago. But this version had something new. A second flamingo standing beside the first, holding its wing. Her knees buckled slightly. Julia sat on the nearest bench, clutching the page to her chest like it might disappear. She didn't know how he found her, didn't know how many places he had searched. But he had found the drawing. He had remembered. And he had waited. That night, Julia didn't cry. She called Emily, voice trembling, and asked her how she was. Her sister sounded better, stronger. She asked if Julia had seen him again. And when Julia whispered, "No, not yet," Emily simply said, "Then maybe you should." The next day, Julia packed up Layla, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "We're going home." They boarded the bus and rode. In silence, the city slowly blooming again in the window. The cafe would still be there, she thought. So would table 2. And maybe, just maybe, so would he. The sky was gray again. Rain clung to the clouds like a secret waiting to fall. Julia stood at the edge of the bus station with Layla's small hand in hers, their one duffel bag resting by their feet. The streets around them buzzed with movement. Traffic, umbrellas, vendors shouting over the drizzle. But inside Julia, there was only stillness, a storm of another kind. She hadn't told him she was coming back. She wasn't sure he'd be there. Part of her wanted to walk straight past the cafe, find another job, disappear again. Maybe life would be easier if she kept running, if she stayed in the world where she knew the rules, where survival meant silence, distance, control. But something deeper pulled at her now, something undeniable. Layla tugged gently at her sleeve. "Are we going to see the man again?" Julia looked down at her, the innocence in her niece's voice, the trust. It broke something open inside her. She crouched down, smoothing the yellow dress Layla wore, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Do you want to see him?" she asked quietly. Layla nodded. He made the flamingo happy. Julia closed her eyes for a moment. Then she stood and reached for the bag. They walked the rest of the way in silence, the rain starting as a mist before turning steady. By the time they reached the block where the cafe stood, the sidewalk glistened with puddles and reflections. The familiar glow of the neon open sign flickered in the window like a heartbeat. Julia hesitated at the corner, heart pounding. Then, without thinking, she stepped forward, only to stop dead in her tracks. He was already outside, standing there in the rain with no umbrella, hands in his coat pockets, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes locked on hers instantly. The world seemed to dim behind him. The cars, the people, even the sound of the rain. Julia froze. So did he. Neither moved for several seconds. Then Alexander stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as though she might vanish if he approached too quickly. "I didn't know if you'd come back," he said softly, water dripping from his hair. Julia swallowed. "Neither did I." He glanced down at Layla, who waved up at him with no hesitation. Alexander smiled gently and knelt to her level. "You wore yellow again," Layla beamed. "It's my favorite." His eyes flicked up to Julia. "Mine too." Julia's throat tightened. "I thought disappearing was the smart thing to do," she admitted, voice trembling. "I thought if I ran, I could keep things simple. Protect her. Protect myself." He rose slowly, rain soaking through his shirt now, clinging to the fabric. "Did it work?" he asked. No, she whispered. Alexander took another step closer. I'm not here to complicate your life, Julia. I'm here because when you walked out of that cafe, it felt like I lost something I hadn't even known I was missing. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. I'm not a charity case. I'm not broken. I don't need saving. I know, he said. I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it feels like to let someone in. I'm not asking you to open the door all the way, he said. Just let me stand on the porch. I'll wait as long as it takes. A long silence passed between them. Then Layla reached out and slipped her hand into his. The moment shattered something inside Julia and mended something else. She stepped forward, closer than she had ever dared. I don't know what this is yet, she said, but I don't want to keep running from it. Alexander smiled, eyes soft with something deeper than relief, something close to peace. Then don't, he said. And in the middle of the rain, on the sidewalk where her world had once felt too heavy to carry, Julia stepped into his arms. Not as someone who needed rescue, but as someone who finally chose to stop surviving and start living. The embrace was quiet, gentle, real. And as Layla wrapped her arms around both of them, Julia knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something worth staying for. Life didn't change overnight. There were no firework moments or whirlwind transformations, no sudden disappearance of debt, no dramatic moves into mansions, no fairy tale after written in gold. Instead, the change came like spring thaw. Slow, deliberate, nearly invisible at first, but undeniable all the same. Julia didn't move in with Alexander. He never asked her to. Instead, he helped find them a small rental house a few blocks from the cafe. 2 bedrooms, clean walls, sunlight in the morning, the kind of place that felt safe but not suffocating. Julia insisted on paying rent, and Alexander didn't argue. He understood she needed ownership over her new beginning. He didn't overwhelm. He didn't hover. He came around in the evenings, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with books for Layla, sometimes just with a look on his face that said, I missed you. And Julia, against all odds, started to let him in. At first, it was little things. She would call him when Layla had a fever. She would text him when she got home late from her shift. She started asking for his opinion on bills, on schools, on whether Layla should get a library card. He never tried to take over. He listened. He offered. He stayed. Layla, for her part, adored him. She asked about him constantly. She started drawing pictures of 3 people instead of 2. When she scraped her knee on the playground one day, she didn't cry for her mom. She whispered, Can Alex come? Julia heard it and froze. She waited for the jealousy, the fear, but it didn't come. It was replaced by something softer, something like relief. One evening, Alexander arrived with takeout and a toolkit. The doorknob had been sticking for weeks, and Julia hadn't had time to fix it. He kneeled on the floor while Layla hovered nearby, holding the flashlight like it was a sacred duty. Julia leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them. You're handy, she said, almost teasing. He smirked. I ran restaurants for 15 years. Do you know how many toilets I've unclogged personally? Julia laughed, really laughed. It was a strange sound, rusty, like something unused. But once it was out, it felt good. Real. After dinner, they sat on the couch. Layla curled between them, half asleep with a coloring book in her lap. The TV played quietly in the background, some old animated film neither of them paid attention to. Julia turned to Alexander, her voice quiet. You know I'm still scared, right? I'd be surprised if you weren't. And you're okay with that? He looked at her then, really looked at her. His eyes were warm but serious. I didn't fall for you because you're fearless, Julia. I fell because you fight through the fear anyway. Her breath caught. He didn't reach for her. He didn't press. He simply sat there, offering presence instead of pressure. That night, for the first time, she fell asleep on the couch with her head resting against his shoulder. No labels, no declarations, just peace. Later that week, he asked her if she'd like to be part of something new, something they could build together. I've been thinking of opening a small cafe, he said one night as they walked Layla home from school. Something warm, local, a place where people actually see each other. Julia raised an eyebrow. You own an empire. You want to open a neighborhood shop? I want to come back to life, he replied simply, and I want to do it with you. She didn't say yes right away. She needed time, not to decide whether she wanted it, but to believe she deserved it. But 2 weeks later, she brought him a notebook. Inside were sketches, menu ideas, layouts, names. He opened it slowly. On the first page, in careful handwriting, were three simple letters: L and J, Layla and Julia. He looked up, his voice catching. "You're serious?" she smiled. "Only if you are." He took her hand in both of his. "I've never been more." And for the first time since she met him at table 2, Julia no longer felt like the woman carrying the weight of the world alone. She felt like a woman building something. Something strong, something real, something worth staying for. The grand opening of L&J Café wasn't grand in the traditional sense. There were no cameras, no media, no headlines announcing the arrival of a billionaire-backed business venture, no red carpets or celebrity endorsements, just string lights hanging in the windows, the scent of fresh pastries, and a hand-painted sign out front that Layla had helped decorate with sunflowers and two tiny flamingos in the corner. It was perfect. Julia stood behind the counter in a soft blue apron, her hair pulled back loosely, face glowing with something more than pride: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being easy, but the kind that comes from having fought your way into the light and realizing you're still standing. Customers trickled in throughout the morning. Neighbors, old cafe regulars, a few curious strangers. Word had spread quietly, and people came not for novelty, but for the warmth. The space radiated something that chain cafes could never replicate: home. Layla sat by the window with a little hostess badge Julia had made just for her, handing out napkins and drawing thank you notes on paper placemats. Her dark curls were pulled back with a yellow ribbon, and her smile was steady, bright. The kind of smile that didn't ask for permission anymore. At around 10:15, Alexander walked in with 2 cups of coffee in hand. One for her, one for himself. He looked tired, but in the good way. The way people look when their days are full of meaning. He leaned over the counter and kissed her on the cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. "How's our little empire doing?" he asked. Julia gave him a playful look. "We ran out of scones." Layla tried to convince an elderly couple to buy her drawings. "I may have accidentally spilled cappuccino on a lawyer's laptop." He grinned. "So, thriving?" "Exactly." He handed her the coffee, and for a few minutes they stood there in quiet companionship, watching their dream take shape around them. After the rush died down, Alexander took a seat by the front window with Layla, and Julia leaned against the doorframe, watching them. He was teaching her how to fold paper into tiny cranes, and she was giggling every time she failed. And he just kept folding, letting her try again. Watching them, something deep inside her softened even further. She had spent so many years gripping the edges of her life with white knuckles, terrified that everything she loved would be taken away. But now, she didn't feel like she was surviving anymore. She felt like she was living. And not just because of Alexander, because of herself, because she had dared to let him see her, and stayed when he didn't look away. Because she had stopped measuring her worth by what she could endure, and started measuring it by what she could build. That evening, as the last of the customers trickled out, Alexander locked the doors and flipped the sign to closed. Layla had fallen asleep in the reading nook, a crayon still clutched in her hand. The lights were low. The cafe was still. Julia stood behind the counter, wiping down the last of the tables, when she heard Alexander's voice behind her. "I have something for you." She turned, brows raised. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. Her heart skipped. He handed it to her with a shy smile, and she unfolded it carefully. Inside was a drawing, 2 flamingos, but this time they stood beside a little one, all 3 of their wings entwined. Below it, one line written in his familiar handwriting: "Our family. Always." Julia stared at it for a long time, tears forming before she could stop them. When she looked up, Alexander was already there, arms around her, holding her close. Not to fix her, not to save her, but to walk beside her. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of something she hadn't trusted in years: a future. And in that quiet cafe, filled with laughter echoes and fresh coffee and dreams once thought impossible, Julia finally let herself believe what she never had before: she was home, She was loved, and she wasn't going anywhere. As the author, this story holds a deep place in my heart, not because it ends with romance or a picture-perfect life, but because it ends with something far rarer, earned peace. Julia's journey isn't a fairy tale. She doesn't wake up one day with all her problems solved. She makes hard choices, battles fear, walks away when it's safest, and then, bravely, walks back when it matters most. Her strength isn't in being invincible, it's in being vulnerable without losing herself. That is what makes her a heroine worth rooting for. Alexander, too, isn't a fantasy. He's a man broken by tragedy, shaped by power, but made whole again by choosing presence over control. His love isn't loud, it's patient. And in a world that often confuses grand with good, his quiet persistence is what gives their story depth. And then there's Layla, the heart of them both. A child who sees hope even when the adults forget how. Her yellow dress and flamingos aren't just visual details. They're symbols of joy that survives, of childhood that still believes in kindness. The ending isn't about perfection, it's about possibility. A family formed not by blood, but by choice. A love built not overnight, but one coffee, one note, one act of trust at a time. To me, that's the most powerful kind of ending, because it feels like a beginning that's finally been earned. And that's the kind of story worth telling.